Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to apply binding to the front of a quilt top to prepare for hand stitching on the back side. So again, my binding is in two colors because I want to show you very clearly how we're going to join the ends, and it's easier to see if you've got two different color ends. And my top thread is blue and my bobbin thread is red. Of course, you would not do this on your own projects, but this is just for the point of showing you how everything works. So we're going to start with the pink end of our binding, and we're going to go ahead and sew that all the way around the quilt. I will zoom in for you so that you can see how this goes. This is our tail end, so we're going to give it about 4 to 5 inches before we start sewing, because we want that tail to be free for us to work with when we join the two binding ends together. So I have a 1/4 inch seam going. I use a walking foot with a little guide on the side of it so I can butt my fabric right up to the edge and not have to pay so much attention to where that 1/4 inch is. So I'm going to sew down to the corner, and then we'll talk about how to address the corner. I do like to start with a couple of back stitches, and you see this tail back here that we're going to leave unsewn because we're going to be working with that later. So I'm just going to take 2 stitches forward and a few stitches back to hold that together. And then we're going to go down to within a 1/4 inch of the corner. So I'm going to zoom in here so that you can see when we get to the 1/4 inch. Now my foot, and probably your feet too, have a little mark on them that shows you when you are close to a 1/4 inch away from whatever's in front of you. So if I line up this mark with the edge of my quilt top, I'll be a 1/4 inch away. Maybe one more. No, that looks good. And then I'm going to lift my presser foot, turn 45 degrees, and run right off the corner of the quilt. I'm going to cut the thread, open it up, and when I flip this, you'll see that I did. I ran right off of the corner of the quilt with that binding stitch. So at this point, I need to turn the corner because I can't keep going this way when my quilt goes that way. So I'm going to spin the quilt. And this is a really cool technique, and it's going to give you exactly what you need. You're going to fold this fabric up using that 1/4 inch line that you just sewed right here as a guide. And then you also want to make sure that these are parallel. The edge, your next edge of the quilt, and your open edge of your binding are parallel. So you're going to fold that up, kind of make a little crease with your hand. And then you're going to hold this crease and fold that binding back down toward your quilt and have this fold parallel with this edge of your quilt. So within here you have kind of a triangle going on. I'll show you one more time. We're going to fold up and make sure that this is close to a 45 degree, and really you can just eyeball it, and that this line is parallel. And then you're going to hang on to this fold while you fold down and make sure that this fold is parallel to your previous line. Now for the beginning of this stitch, you can start right off the edge of the quilt because that is not going to be anything you have to start inside. And you're just going to sew down to the next end. So I will keep doing that so you can see the next corner. And again, we're sewing this to the front of the quilt because we're going to hand sew this binding to the back. So you're going to keep going. Your binding will probably not have a color change like this. Again, that is just for tutorial purposes, not a design element. And when I get down to within a 1/4 inch here, I'm going to use that guide mark on my walking foot. I'm going to lift up my presser foot, turn the corner 45 degrees, run right off the edge. It's kind of fun. Kind of feels like you're breaking a rule. And then if I flip that, you'll see that that runs right off of the edge. Of course, the red is my bobbin thread. The blue is my top thread. So then I spin the quilt again, go up, hold it, go down. Whoop, that one, see, you got to hang on. Up, hold it, go down, make sure that that second fold is parallel with the top of the quilt. Hopefully you can see that there. Hang on to it, and then start that next stitching line right off the edge of the quilt and run right onto it. And we're going to keep doing that until we get around all 4 corners. And if you're anything like me, binding always feels like it has 5 corners, not 4. I always think I'm almost done, and then I have a couple more corners to go. Get that thread off of there. And you'll get to see this corner technique one more time because we're almost at the corner of this teeny little pretend quilt top I've got going on. So again, we're going to take this to a 1/4 inch from the edge, lift that presser foot, turn 45 degrees, and run right off the edge. Cut the thread, check to make sure you were close. That one's not perfect, but it's close enough. You're going to turn that quilt, fold up, fold down, and start again. So we're going to run from the beginning here. And now we're on the 4th side. We're getting ready to do the 4th corner. And then I'm going to show you how we join the 2 binding ends. Joining the 2 binding ends is a very important technique for not having extra bulk in your binding, as well as having a binding that lays nice and flat on the edge of your quilt. Binding is one of those things that judges always look for when you are being judged in a quilt show, because for one thing, it's the closest thing to the judge, so it is something that's easy to see and easy to kind of grade. So you definitely want to pay attention when you're at the binding phase. I know a lot of times people are tired of this quilt and they want to be done and they don't want to think about binding, but I promise you it's worth it. So for this one, because we have this tail right here that we need to join to, I'm only going to sew about 1 inch down because I want some free play here with this free play here so that I can put them together. So let's just sew just enough to get that fold secured. Do a couple little back stitches because we are going to be working with these ends. I'm going to back this up again so you can see what's happening now. So at this point this is the beginning of the binding, and this is going to be the end of the binding. I made it way, way too long, so I could chop some of that off, but it's really not necessary. So at this point, I'm going to take the beginning of my binding, which is pink, and kind of smooth it down, lay it flat against the quilt so I'll know exactly where it should be finishing. Now I'm going to take my green piece, which is the end of the binding, and lay it mostly on top of the pink piece with just a little bit of the pink showing because I want you to see this right here. This is the beginning of the cut of the pink piece. So if I re-lift that up, you see this is the 45-degree angle that we cut when we first made that binding. This is the beginning of that cut. So I'm going to take this mark right here and add a 1/2 inch to it. That will be the beginning of this cut so that when this piece and that piece are seamed together, they each have a 1/4 inch. So I will grab a ruler that has some good markings on it and hold that, let's see, I'm gonna lay it right here. And if you'll look really closely, let's see if I can get closer for you. Slide this over. This is where, let's see, I'll show you with the pin again. It is hard to show these tiny things. This is where the pink part begins. Let's see, can I slide this over? Yes. This is where the pink part begins. So we want to go a 1/2 inch further to start that same cut on the green fabric. And sometimes I use one of these wash away pens just to put a little dot so I know where I'm starting. Now, this is a little shortcut move by me. I don't know if it's something that, you know, a very seasoned teacher might tell you to do, but I know that this cut has to go this direction. And I have something I can use right here with me to help me make that line. This is the end of the binding that we worked with earlier. So if I open this up, I know that my cut has to go this way. So I can take this binding end, line up the bottom right there at that dot that I made, line up the top so that these are parallel right here, and then I could either draw this line, or I could pin this, or I could do whatever I need to do to make it all hang on to itself. I'm going to throw a couple of pins in, and then you can just hand cut that particular line. And then that will give you what you need to sew the pink end to the green end. So I'm going to hand cut this based on that 45-degree seam that we cut at the beginning. Toss that away. And now you'll see that these two pieces overlap by 1/2 inch. Hopefully you can see that. Let's see. These two pieces now overlap by 1/2 inch. So what we can do is we can put these two pieces together with that seam where it's going to be on the inside. We're going to put these two pieces together, and once we sew that 1/4 inch seam on these, just like we did when we made the original binding, it should lay absolutely flat against the edge of the quilt, and we'll be able to sew that last line of stitching. Now, one thing you may have to do here, you may have to fold up your quilt a little so that you don't have so much pull when you're trying to get these guys lined up, because you don't want anything, any forces sort of affecting your ability to get a good 1/4 inch seam here. So in this case, I am going to pin these together because I want to be sure that I only have to sew it once. So I'm going to pin them together, and you want, of course, the overlap on each point so that your stitch line catches both within a 1/4 inch. So this is about a 1/4 inch in, and this one's about a 1/4 inch in. So we're going to then do whatever you have to do so that you can get this piece under your machine needle, and we will stitch that little line to get those two binding ends joined together. And once we pull out the pins, it should, fingers crossed, lay nice and flat on the quilt top. So let's see if we back up and open the quilt top. We can see that these two pieces will lay nice and flat, and then that allows me to sew that last line of stitching, and the whole quilt top will be bound on the front. Now, if you're wondering what I do about this seam in here, I usually just sort of finger press it because I don't really want to get up and go to the iron at this point. So I will just start sewing here, and then when I get to the seam, I'll just sort of make sure it's all going the same direction, and then I'll keep going. So right here, I'm going to start my sewing again. Continue right through that seam I just made. And then when we cut that, you'll see that this is now a completely finished binding all the way around. And you would never know where we stopped and started, except that mine changes colors, but hopefully yours will not. But either way, you can't tell if this was the last seam or if this was the last seam, because they look identical, which is the perfect way to make binding that always fits. Now, if we're going to be hand stitching this to the back, all we have to do is flip this over, fold, you're going to basically roll that binding to the other side, and then you're going to use some hand thread and whip stitch this down. A lot of people, me included, like to use quilty clips, wonder clips. They have lots of names, but they're these great little plastic clips that you can clip on to your binding that hold it in place while you are sewing by hand, which is handy, haha, no pun intended, because sometimes it kind of makes your hands tired to have to hold that fold. And if you use these wonder clips, then you don't ever really have to hold it. And I also find it really rewarding when I'm hand stitching to be able to take one of these clips off, because I'm like, yeah, I made it to that clip. Now it's time to go to the next clip. So in the next video, I'm going to get some thread lined up, and I'll show you just how I whip stitch that. And that will be your tutorial on machine front hand back binding.